welcome once again to David English. Well, we're on a Sunday afternoon, David. It's a great privilege for the viewers to see us on these uncharted territory. Having said that, there's a lot of uncharted territory at the moment. The war, inverted commas, skirmish, putting Iran in its place, whatever is carrying on. And as you're the expert on China and all things Chinese, I think down the road, or maybe even up the road, things are going to kick off with China. Tell us about that.
Well, it depends which perspective you want to look at it from. So, from a historical perspective, I think we're in the phase where communism and Marxism is going to be challenged globally. It's going to get wiped out. But what communism is, and Marx himself said it was a specter that was haunting Europe, right? So it's like it has its tentacles everywhere, and that's in a spiritual sense and in a physical sense. The Chinese government have their fingers into everything everywhere. So rooting that out, it's like you cut off a tentacle, it's going to scream, right? The beast is going to scream. It's like chopping the head off the hydra at the minute. So I think wherever the world goes to try and root these things out, there's going to be trouble. And I can't see us getting through the next 6 or 7 years without a lot of war breaking out everywhere. Don't think it'll quite break out into a world war, but I think there will be a lot of localized conflicts, like Ukraine, like Israel, Iran. And one of the ones that I'm expecting is China and Taiwan. That's been on China's radar for a long time. There's a few things throwing into that mix, which is China reportedly has huge demographic collapse. They are struggling to hold on to power. They're struggling to hold on to money. The Chinese communist system runs on grift. It runs on corruption, bribery, paying people off. It's like, yes, you're unhappy, but here's some money. You can maybe get something overseas, or you can travel, or you can buy this, or you can buy that. And I think in their desperation, because I'm not sure Xi Jinping's gonna stay either. China is split into two camps. You have the Xi camp, who initially was for pro opening everything up, ending all of the human trafficking, ending all of the persecutions, ending all of the organ harvesting, and then the other camp who were for all of these things. Now, it's not that they've kind of merged into one. It's just that Xi's backtracked on what he thought and is trying to eliminate everybody else. So whether he stays, I'm not so sure, but I do think that when regimes get to that level, war is kind of the next thing because it distracts the public. So, I think Iran would have gone to war at some point in the next few years. I think they needed to in order to survive. I think the CCP will do the same. And they are preparing to invade Iran. They're doing war games that simulate the invasion of Iran. They're testing, not Iran, Taiwan. They're testing Taiwanese airspace. I think we all know that. America knows it. We have ships over there. This is where the Chagos Islands are so important. And I actually think the last thing America needed right now was to take Iran on like this, to be honest. I don't think this was planned at all. I think this has been a bit of a cock-up. And America has to get involved because Israel can't sustain it. Israel's a very good, blitzkrieg army, right? Ironically. They can go in and absolutely hammer somewhere for a week or 2 weeks, but they can't sustain it beyond that without Western support. And I think Trump would have done with Iran what he did with North Korea. I think he would have negotiated them down into a position of softening in the regime, opening up the country. He would have traded off in a better way than what they currently had, the nuclear capabilities for other things. And I don't think that he wanted to go to war because I think he wants to be able to be free enough to maneuver if China trigger, because China can only invade Taiwan, I think, between March and September or October. And after that, the sea gets too rough because Taiwan's it's not, Iran's like a fortress, like a hill fortress, but Taiwan's like a rocky outcrop. It doesn't have a coastline as such. You can't just pull up and offload. You've got to get through essentially an obstacle course of rocks to get to the mainland. So they kind of have a narrow window. But if they force Iran to close the Straits of Hormuz, which looks like they might, then that's essentially almost all of China's oil supply.
It does, nearly 80%, as I understand it. And
So
they don't want that.
yeah, I don't know. I don't particularly trust Netanyahu. I love Jewish people, right? I've worked for them. I live very near a large Jewish community. That doesn't mean that all of them are good. It doesn't mean that the government is good. It doesn't mean that the Secret Service is good. I don't think there is a government in the world that has a good government. I think maybe Bukele in El Salvador is probably the closest you're going to get to the least corrupt government in the world. We know that Mossad were linked with Epstein. Like every government, it's not good. They are not a good government. They are corrupt, like every single government in the world. I think this was an error on his part, and I think it's got to the stage where they were running out of fuel, and America's had to step in, because once Israel looked weak, then the entire region would have went for Israel.
Yeah.
And I just don't think Trump needed this, because I think China is eyeing Taiwan, and he wants his resources free to tackle China. You take China out the mix, everything calms down. Iran backs off, Russia backs off, the Middle East terrorism backs off, the human trafficking and smuggling into the West backs off, the drug trade, the fentanyl, everything backs off when you take China out. And by China, I mean the CCP. You just have to force a collapse within China of the CCP peacefully. Let the people do it, which is, I think, what he would have pushed for in Iran. I don't think he would have pushed for military action in Iran, because it's like attacking a mountain fort. It's ridiculous. It's huge. It's not an easy country, right? And I think he would have pushed for a peaceful regime change.
Yeah, I mean, you can't point to the man on the ground there and say, would you really like it? Because they're that terrified in Iran. Nobody dares to stand up and say, well, yeah, I mean, there is a faction there that would want a change of governance, but it's not like other regimes that are in terrible circumstances. I mean, one thinks of Hamas in Gaza. Now, there is an uprising going there where, oh no, can we step up and take our country back? Not a great uprising, one must say, because again, the fear factor comes in. But is this the only way to win the war? Is get the local populace on your side?
Well, I don't. This is the thing. Like, I'm not anti-war, right? I think war has its place. I think it's very naive to think we can live without war. I think there will always be a need for war, even if we sort of ascend as a species and learn our lessons and become spiritually more advanced. We still have war. We'll just have less of it, right? You were never going to not have a need for war, but I don't think war should. It's all right. So from the English perspective, I'm very English when it comes to war. You should exhaust every single diplomatic and peaceful option possible. Then when you go to war with the single aim of the complete and utter total destruction of your enemy. Not their people, your enemy. And your enemy is their military. And this is what shifted in the last 100 years. We've stopped going to war against militaries, and we've started going to war against civilians. And that's abhorrent. That's wrong. That is evil. You should never, ever target civilians. And we did in Iraq, and that's disgusting. We did in the Second World War. We killed more innocent German people than died in the camps. And that's wrong, right? You should never, ever target the innocent population. You can go back through history, and the English army were known for executing soldiers who laid a hand on the native populations. So I come from that English perspective, right? So I think the world has to change, but I think it has to change by allowing those people to be self-determinant of their future. And in a country like Iran, they're not. Now, I think it's something like 30% of the population now practice Islam in Iran. The rest have walked away. They're either atheist or Christian. The mosques are empty. They're shutting down because nobody's going. The Chinese will be pushing an anti-American If anybody on the right is expressing a divisive opinion against Trump, the Chinese will be all over this.
Yes, I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking about you've got a situation here that the last month or so have developed in America is that Trump is all talk. He never actually presses the button. Well, he's proved that wrong. I wonder if it'll do Russian and Chinese thoughts any good. Will they say, oh, well, the guy's serious. We'd better sit back and see what we can do to appease him or to reach a peaceful conclusion?
Well, he certainly uses hyperbole a lot, more than Boris Johnson. And he uses it to an effect. It's basically essentially sit down or I'll give you a clip. And somebody has stood up, so he's basically been backed into a corner. And I think he has been backed into a corner. I think Netanyahu's outmaneuvered him. And he's had to give Iran a clip. Now that's going to do, there's two lines of thought there. One is that Russia and China will pull together tighter, and they'll probably pull Egypt and Turkey on board too. Certainly, there are lines of thought from political analysts that suggest that Turkey will probably look into seeing how they can defeat American air defense, or have an air defense system to defeat the American military. There's a lot of people predicting that Egypt and Turkey will be looking into acquiring their own nuclear weapons now, if that's the only deterrent, is that they have to have nukes. And the other one is that, Russia and China will go, well, Trump's prepared to put his money where his mouth is. We better tread a bit more carefully. So it kind of, I think only time will tell. This thing with Iran came out of such left field that nobody really expected it to go like this. And what essentially has happened is that Trump was negotiating, and even up until 3 days ago, you're saying you've got 2 weeks to sort it out, and now he's gone and bombed them. So basically, it looks like Trump's negotiating promises are worthless. That's what's been happening, and I think that will really annoy Trump. Now, there was a meeting that Netanyahu and Trump had recently in the White House. Trump wasn't happy at all, wouldn't look him in the eye, wouldn't shake his hand properly. So there's something going on there, and I think Netanyahu is manipulating Trump and politicians around Donald Trump. And like I said, I think the only reason this has happened is because Netanyahu's gone so far that unless America stepped in, Israel would be under severe punishment from all of the nations around it, because they'd just smell blood. And they are far better equipped than they were in the Yom Kippur War in 1967. So this isn't man against man. I was talking about this with my son this morning. Warfare has become such an ignoble art where it's not a case of pitting the virtue of the men of one nation against the virtue of the men of another. It's who has the bigger computer controlled technology. So it's not even against people, the worthiness of the people. You can't even determine whether a nation is worthy anymore. They just have to have more money and more technology. It's become a disgusting thing. And I just think that Trump has been reduced to a bad faith negotiator. And that's not his style ever. He hasn't done anything like this. Is uncharacteristic of Donald Trump. He negotiates in good faith. He negotiates hard, and he sets his line out very, very hard. I want this, and if you don't give me this, I'm going to box you around the lugs. But the minute you sit down and negotiate with him, he's more than prepared to meet you in the middle. So this just makes him look like a cheat and a liar. And I genuinely think he's been outplayed.
Yep.
And I think Israel will, all of the goodwill that Israel's built up over a long time, I think really in the last 2 years, they've pretty much eroded it, which is a shame. It's a real shame because it'll affect the people. And it's not the people, it's Netanyahu. And I just don't trust the guy. I don't think he's a good faith operator. I think he's a bad faith operator. And as always, it's always the people of nations that suffer, which is a real shame.
Don't neglect your PR department. Let's move on. Well, in one sense, we're moving on. We're sticking with China, who are flooding the market with EVs. In Britain now, it's 1 in 10 electric vehicles are from China, and all over the world they're flooding. But this is quite common from China. And even Ursula, the wonderful Ursula that leads Europe, has said, surprisingly, oh, Donald was right. They are getting in there at various levels, certainly commercially at one level. What can the West do? I mean, it wants EVs. I
It doesn't
don't.
want EVs. Well, that's the irony. Nobody wants EVs. So the reason the Chinese are flooding our market with EVs is because nobody in China wants them. So they're all sat on lots. They're all sat in these gigantic 100-acre lots because the Chinese don't even want them. But they have to produce X amount of EVs to hit the government quota that the government set. So we're back to the Soviet era of one factory producing left foot shoes, and the other factory producing right foot shoes. It's the same lunacy. And nobody wants them, so they're just going to try and dump them on the EU. So it's just nobody wants them. Nobody's going to buy the Chinese ones because it'll be cheap, but it'll be crap, and it'll break in 2 years or 3 years. You'll have no end of problems with it. So the irony is nobody is buying electric vehicles except for Teslas, and they're only buying Teslas because they're cool. It's not because they're electric; it's because they're cool in the space age. So it's the whole thing, and Elon's not making them to save the planet. He's making them because he likes money.
Yeah.
He wants to be successful. He saw a gap in the market and went for it. So it's all fake. Nobody's buying their agenda. Nobody's buying what they're offering, and they will jump on anything to push it. But yes, the Chinese are into every single market. They want to devalue every single market. It's a warfare tactic. Ruin your trade base, make them dependent on that country, and then they have to comply with your demands because you can't afford to shake them off. You're basically shackled at that point. You're essentially, China's trade policy is no different to paying tribute.
Interesting thought. Let's go into the medical field, especially in the United States. Doctors can see that they can get medical equipment from China very cheaply, and they're doing it. But now some senator has stood up and said, enough. We have evidence that they're planting, as they have been planting for years in solar panels, little devices that can relate data back to China. And they're doing it with the medical stuff as well.
They're doing it with everything.
Part of the scheme.
Yeah. They're doing it with everything. Huawei phones, TikTok, everything. Everything is collecting data. They're looking for information. It's basically Stasi espionage for the 21st century. That's all it is. They're constantly spying everywhere, looking for weaknesses that they can exploit. In terms of medical equipment, they're looking for biomedical weaknesses that they can exploit in warfare. They're not stupid. And yeah, they're doing it in everything, whether it's telephones, medical equipment. I mean, they found it in the fighter jets when Trump took office the first time. And we're doing the same, but nobody's blowing the whistle. We're just as bad here, but nobody's blowing the whistle. And the entire country is being compromised by China very, very slowly. And nobody's really doing anything about it because everyone's just far too corrupt.
Indeed. Dominic Cummings today has revealed all sorts of things which we knew about, but it's nice to have it, or is it nice to have it confirmed? The utter ineptness of our government and the collusion, and it's awful. That for another chat, but sticking with the horrible thing of organ harvesting in China. And let's say right at the outset that both China and America are culpable within the scheme. People are literally being killed because it's not a question of giving one kidney. It's a question of not volunteering, but being killed and extracting every organ they can. And it's sent over to all parts of the earth, but especially to America. And the doctors in America are not doing due diligence. They couldn't care less. They make massive money out of this. and they're not interested. Well, I hope Senator gets something going here, because we've got to be sure of the source of that organ, and that will overnight stop this wicked trade.
Well, it'll go somewhere to stopping it. And I don't think every doctor is involved in America. There's a lot of them aren't. There's a lot of them actively speak about this. And American politicians have actually been really good on this, as has the Lords in England. The Lords have been very good on this as well. So it is. One of the things China does is China will do something that is morally reprehensible, but then they'll kind of convince you to do the same thing. Right, so then they try to change your behavior to be like theirs, so then it normalizes their criminality, but it also makes you complicit, right? So one of the things that they did in 2014 was the Chinese government came over here to lecture our doctors on how to make our transplant system more like the Chinese transplant system, which is highly profitable, right? And then you see that they bring out the change in the law so that you have to opt out of organ donation. Now we're seeing that you can abort a child up till birth without criminality. Now those body parts from that baby are worth a fortune. To give somebody a fresh, young, fully developed kidney, who's some high-end billionaire or party cadre, is worth gold, right? So we have to just accept the fact that the waste from bodies, whether they are fetuses or children or full-grown adults, is worth an astronomical amount of money. And China is changing the world to be like it, so that when the finger is pointed, the curtain finally comes down. It's normal. We see a reflection of what we are, right? And then nothing will happen. And that's what they're hoping for, is to make the world like them. And America has been good about this. And I know for a fact Trump's team knows all about this. And if you look at a lot of the executive orders that Trump's passed, they are triggered towards encircling this issue. He's given the American military authority on this issue. And eventually, at some point, he has to pull that trigger. And I mean, hopefully it'll be in a peaceful way that the Chinese government go. And they are clinging on to power. Let's not make any mistakes about it. They're literally clinging on to power. And fingers crossed they'll go peacefully. The people will push them out, which I think was beginning to happen when COVID hit, which throws another shade on the COVID period, another interesting angle, because they then had to all get locked in their houses. So I think it's abhorrent, and it's an evil we haven't seen. I mean, this is an evil we haven't seen. You know, people being purposefully kept and reared and kept alive for the process of harvesting their organs. And it goes so far, in the labor camps in China, because they beat them, but they're told how to beat them in ways that avoid the organs, so that the organs stay healthy. It's wicked. It's incredibly wicked. It is. I don't think we quite understand how wicked China has become, because we get taken to the tourist cities,
Yeah. Well, Canada's woken up. They've already passed the law. Well done, Canada. They're ahead of everybody. So they've spotted this, and I wish more countries would follow.
Well, the former PM, I forget his name now, it was the guy before Trudeau. I can see his picture in my head, but I can't remember his name. He was brilliant. I remember there was a press junket that went out to visit one of the frozen parts of Canada, and there was a press junket. The Chinese journalists tried to come on the boat, and he threw them off. He's like, I don't want you.
No.
He was excellent. He was really, really good on this.
Well,
so he
that was from the conservative Christian perspective, I would guess.
I forget the guy's name, but he was brilliant. He was really outspoken on it, and he was right at the front. Because what you got to remember is one of the guys who did the investigation on this was a former Canadian MP, David Kilgour, right? He was a Canadian MP. He devoted a huge amount of time. I think he's passed away now, unfortunately. But over 20 years, he devoted a huge amount of time, along with David Matus. They used to call them the two Davids. You had David Kilgour and David Matus, and then a American journalist called Ethan Gutmann, who's a remarkable individual, Ethan. And they literally devoted their careers to exposing this. So Canada until Trudeau, Canada was right out on the anti-China platform and laid a very good foundation for this. But some of the American senators have been absolutely incredible. So I think good things will happen, and I think it's like, if you can't tell at this such a basic level of good and evil, right? And I know we grumble about our government and we're annoyed, there's things that are doing that they're wrong, but when it gets down to that basic of a level that you can't tell the difference between good and evil based on how the Chinese government operate, there's got to be a problem there. That's not normal. Like, they're operating in a way that we never seen the Germans do this. We never seen even the Russians, the Soviets, operate like this. Even Pol Pot wasn't doing stuff like this. This is like a different level of hell that we're living in. And people really should evaluate that on that basis. It's like, and I think it is almost like, look, we can disagree. Some people are going to be left leaning, some people are going to be right leaning to varying degrees, but it's like, we should all agree that this is just absolutely horrendous. This is like an issue that will define our time, as to those who can recognize it as pure evil and those who will make excuses for it. And China's doing a massive PR operation to make sure that people recognize what it's doing as being normal and good. And we're just using up the excess. They will do a huge PR job, and they've infiltrated all sides of the argument. China will play both sides to get the middle right. There's just as much influence on the right as they have on the left.
David, finally, Donald has not forgotten the 2020 election.
No.
He's got, his teeth into this via the FBI. And the FBI are saying definitely there was dodgy playing here, especially with the Chinese people in the US. It has emerged from a person that I'm sure you know, Kash Patel, from your work there. And Kash is saying, well, look, we've discovered a factory producing driving licenses, copies of. You can't distinguish them from the new. And of course, with that, you can vote. And that significantly affected the results.
Yeah, I mean, there was a shipping container from China on its way to America caught full of fake ballot papers for the American election. Another story I heard from people well placed was that in the aftermath of that, when all the evidence was coming out, they basically went round Washington. The Chinese government went around Washington with bags full of money and essentially said, here, you got two options. You can either take a job in the new administration, in the new Biden world, or you can turn a blind eye. And they paid people off. I mean, the links, I'll leave the links between the governor of Texas, Georgia, the governor of Georgia, and the Chinese are huge. Mitch McConnell, his wife is the daughter of the CCP's golden boy, right? They have institutions named after their family in China, right? He literally lives on Chinese money. And you can go through, this is just the Republicans alone. You can just go through the Republicans and pick off the Chinese cash as to which way they went on this issue, right? So a lot of people were paid off. And I think there will be more subversion to come as well. And the Chinese admitted, I have it on a hard drive on an old computer down here. In fact, I took the hard drive out, I think it's here. They admitted themselves that they had a problem with Donald Trump. Donald Trump wouldn't play with them. It was financially costing for them. So they fixed it. They said, we fixed the Trump problem. And then all the audience laughed. Now, the Chinese know what that means, because they don't say there's a bush. They talk around the area of where the bush is, and you understand that there's a bush there, right? And they said, yes, we pay Joe Biden. We consider Biden to be a good investment for China. So all this was admitted by the Chinese government. And the West, this was when the huge censorship thing was going on and everything was locked down, 2020, 2021. You couldn't get this out to anybody. And then when it did come out, everyone's like, well, yeah, COVID's happened. We know they're all evil dictators now. So what? And I think it's like, no, we need to not let go of the world we had before 2020. That is important that we hold on to that, because all of this, it has to be addressed. There has to be justice. There has to be redress. There has to be a balance brought. So there has to be something brought against these people. We can't forget it, and we can't let them off the hook either. It doesn't matter that they've whitewashed it and they've pushed it under the carpet. It's like, no, we cannot let this go. And if it means the destruction of the institutions because they've become so corrupt, that's fine. We'll build it again. We build it a first time. We'll build it a second time. It's not a problem, right? If there's one thing that the Anglos globally are good at, it's building empires, right? We'll do it again. Don't worry about it. But there has to be a comeuppance. There has to be a justice brought. We cannot forget the world that we had. Now, we're not going back to it, but we can't ever let go of what they took from us. My kids lost years. My kids lost years of being children. That'll never come back. That will affect them later in life. Mm. Who do I go to for that? Who do I go to say, you seriously harmed my children? Where can I get my justice?
Yeah.
There has to be somewhere. There was people who, my wife's grandfather, 97 years old, served his country, wonderful, beautiful man, died alone in hospital. You couldn't see him when he was alive in case you caught COVID. But when he was dead, you were all fine to go in.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with that. It was inhumane. It was disgusting. It was evil. And it all comes about because they wanted to steal the election in perpetuity. They openly said, we want to lock down the world until the next election. That was what they wanted. They wanted the West locked down and censorship up to the hilt until the next election, because they knew if they got another one, then there would never be a free West again. And we can't let them off with that. They all need to have some sort of justice served against them. Now, whether it's treason and they get executed or they go to jail or they get fined, I don't care. I'm a Northern Englishman. I don't care. But there has to be justice brought. There has to be. And we can't forget what they took. It's wrong.
David, I was thinking when Trump was issuing what he'd done, what America had done, a statement. Now, I was sort of transposing it in my mind because it was a good mini speech, very factual, actually brought God into the equation. My goodness me. And two things I thought that would never happen in Britain. Of course, our atheist prime minister would have left God out. Secondly, what if Biden had won the last election? Could you see him making a speech like that?
Well, no, I mean, he couldn't make a speech. He would have just he would have mumbled something incoherently and just went, come on, man, and then went and had some ice cream. So, yeah, I mean, look, he was a puppet. He didn't know where he was half the time. They had him drugged up to his eyeballs and just used him, which is disgusting. I don't think Joe Biden's a good man, never did. But that was a very ignoble end to his life. And, maybe it's deserved because he was, quite a wretched individual. But I think what they did is pretty evil. But he couldn't have made a speech like that. And look, we have to bring God into the equation. It's a spiritual sickness. We are spiritual beings, right? You cannot be divorced from that and expect to have a normal life and a good life. You have to be connected to that because that is the wellspring of everything. And the problems in the world will not go away until we become spiritual beings again. Marxism is a spiritual doctrine. He said it's a spirit. There is a spectre. It is a dark, malevolent spiritual doctrine. Just because he doesn't openly reference a being or a deity doesn't mean it's not a spiritual doctrine. The issue we have against Islamic extremism, it's a spiritual doctrine. Like you cannot fight something that is spiritual by being an atheist, because the essence of being spiritual requires you to draw strength and stamina and endurance from a different place beyond the physical body. I mean, we saw this through two people Very small, unrelated, but two things. One of them is Tyson Fury, and the other one is the Ukrainian guy that he fought. Oh, his name has just gone out of my head. And they both referenced God as being the inspiration of how they won. Now, Deontay Wilder is a very strong man. He's got a very good right hook. He floored Tyson Fury. Now, Tyson Fury physically isn't as imposing as Deontay Wilder. He looks like your Uncle John. He's like overweight. He's got love handles, but he's got a chin going on and all the rest of it. But he's a gypsy. It's hard as nails, right? And he got knocked on the floor, and you could see he just went, "Whoa, that was a good one." And they asked him, "How did you get back up from that?" And he went, "God picked me back up from that." And that is the thing, that the spirit allows you to draw from somewhere something that can overcome your fear. It can overcome your physical fatigue. It's more than adrenaline. It is something additional. So until we hook back into our spiritual roots, we're not going to win this. It's a spiritual war. And we've been hoodwinked into thinking it's not. It's just a material thing, and it isn't. It isn't at all.
David, thank you as always. Very interesting. Plenty to think about there. And we'll see you very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodney. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a nice day.